Have you ever felt invisible? Like the world has moved on without you? Today we share a story that reminds us of the strength found in even the most unexpected places. A story of a grandmother who, in the face of betrayal and heartbreak, discovered the power of standing up for herself. Stay with us as we unfold her journey, and let it touch your heart as deeply as it has touched ours. Abandoned in the garage by her own son, you won't believe what happened next. The cold reality. The night air was biting, colder than I had expected as I pulled the thin blanket tighter around my frail shoulders. The garage was not the place I had imagined spending my days now that my body had begun to betray me. I had lived a life full of purpose, structured and respected. But now, all I had left was the faint glow of a single flashlight that cast long shadows across dust-covered boxes and forgotten gardening tools. It had been 3 days since my son Michael had told me that I would be fine in the garage for a while. His words echoed in my mind, each one a sharp sting against my dignity. I had been in the house for 2 nights, the cold creeping in each morning as the sun barely managed to rise above the horizon. Now, I had been relegated to this space, this cold, empty room, where the only company was the creaking of the wooden beams above me. This was not the home I had envisioned returning to after my stroke. I had worked hard all my life, a court secretary for 47 years. I was known for my precision, my meticulous organization, my ability to handle sensitive cases with care and authority. I had been proud of my work, and even prouder of the family I had raised. But now, I felt like a shadow of the woman I once was. The stroke had taken so much from me. It had left me weak, unable to care for myself the way I once had. When the doctor insisted that I could no longer live alone, Michael had urged me to move in with him and his wife, Rachel. At first, I had welcomed the idea, thinking they would help me with the simple tasks that had become overwhelming: grocery shopping, doctor's appointments, keeping track of my medications. I never imagined that I would become a burden, a problem to be swept away like an old piece of furniture. Yet here I was, in the garage, stripped of my dignity. As I lay there on the folding cot, the blanket too thin to keep the cold at bay, I couldn't help but think about the past. I had always been strong. I had worked alongside judges and attorneys, handling case files and court documents with precision. I had been proud of the work I had done, the respect I had earned. But now, lying in this garage, it felt as though all of that had been for nothing. I wondered if my life, my years of service, had meant anything at all. I missed the smell of fresh paperwork, the sound of the courtroom, the weight of the gavel in my hands. I missed the feeling of being needed, of being important. Now, all I could do was lie in this cold room, wondering what had become of me. The silence was deafening. I could hear the faint sound of Michael and Rachel talking in the kitchen, their voices muffled but still audible. I heard Rachel's sharp tone cutting through the quiet morning air. "She'll be fine out there. It's just for a while," she had said. There was no warmth in her voice, no hint of concern for my well-being. Only cold indifference. When I first moved in with them, I had been hopeful, trusting that they would help me through this difficult time. But I had quickly realized that their help came with strings attached. I was no longer a mother, no longer a loved one. I was an inconvenience, a burden they were willing to tolerate for as long as it took for them to decide what to do with me. As the days wore on, the garage became my prison. I woke each morning to the sound of the distant hum of traffic outside, the rustling of leaves in the trees, and the cold air seeping through the walls. The garage was silent, save for the occasional creak of the floorboards or the sound of a door slamming shut in the house. I had learned to keep quiet, to make myself as small as possible, hoping that by doing so, I could avoid their attention. But every time Michael or Rachel spoke, I could hear the contempt in their voices, the way they talked about me as if I were already gone. They thought I couldn't hear them. But I could. And I would remember every word. The first night in the garage had been the hardest. I had layered on every sweater I could find, pulled the rough blanket tight around me, and tried to ignore the draft that seeped under the door. I lay awake for hours, my mind racing. I thought about all the years I had spent working to provide for my family, raising Michael to be a good man, sacrificing my own comfort for his well-being. And now, here I was, lying in the cold, wondering where it all went wrong. I remembered the days when Michael was a little boy, his wide eyes and bright smile. I remembered the way he would come to me after every school event, proud of his accomplishments, even the ones that didn't go as planned. I had always been there for him, always supported him. But now, as an adult, he had discarded me, left me to freeze in a garage like an old piece of furniture no longer useful. As I lay in the dark, I couldn't help but feel a sense of loss, not just for the warmth of the house, but for the relationship I had once had with my son. I had given so much to him, and in return, he had given me nothing but coldness. I thought of my husband, how he would have never allowed this to happen. He would have fought for me, stood by my side, and never let me be treated like this. But now, he was gone, and I was left to face this cold reality alone. The second night was even colder. I pulled the thin blanket over me and prayed that I would not wake up shivering in the middle of the night. I thought about my husband, about the way he held me when I cried after the stroke, how he promised me that everything would be okay. But now, I was alone, lying in a cold garage, wondering if I had been forgotten. The third morning came, and I could hear Michael's voice outside the garage door. "You okay, Mom?" he asked, his voice filled with half-hearted concern. I wanted to scream at him, to ask him how he could do this to me after everything I had done for him. But I didn't. Instead, I nodded, my voice barely a whisper. "I'm fine," I said, though I wasn't. As I lay there, I realized that this was not about survival. It was about something far deeper. It was about the loss of dignity, the loss of respect, and the betrayal of the trust I had placed in my own family. And as the cold air seeped in around me, I made a vow. I would not let this be my fate. I would find a way to fight back. I would find a way to reclaim my life. A lifetime of service. As I sat there on the cold, hard cot in the garage, my mind wandered back to a time when my life had purpose, when I was a part of something larger, something important. I had not always been the frail, discarded woman sitting in the dark, shivering under a thin blanket. No, once I had been strong, vibrant, and respected. The years I spent working as a court secretary were some of the most fulfilling of my life. I was organized, meticulous, and trusted. My role in the courthouse was pivotal. Without my careful handling of case files, court schedules, and witness statements, many important cases could have fallen apart. I had earned my place, not only among my colleagues, but also within my family. But now, it felt as though all that had been erased. The power I once wielded in a courtroom was gone, replaced by the cold silence of the garage. I used to hold the gavel in my mind, leading the proceedings, dictating order to chaos. But now, my days were defined by the chilly draft under the door and the constant sound of my own heartbeat, a reminder of the solitude that surrounded me. I had spent decades in the legal world, handling complex cases, assisting judges with their decisions, and ensuring that justice was served. I knew the law inside and out, every section, every precedent. My colleagues had respected me, and I had earned a reputation for being diligent, reliable, and calm under pressure. There was a sense of pride in my work, a sense of satisfaction that I was contributing to something greater than myself. I was a cog in the wheel of justice, and that role had given my life meaning. And then there was my family. Michael, my only son, was always the center of my world. From the moment he was born, I dedicated my life to providing for him, supporting him, and ensuring that he had every opportunity to succeed. I worked long hours, often sacrificing my own comfort and well-being to make sure Michael never wanted for anything. I put his needs above my own, always. I stayed up late helping him with his homework, driving him to his piano lessons, and cheering him on at every school event. Every milestone he reached was a victory for both of us. His successes were mine as much as they were his. When Michael went off to college, I had been proud of him. He was the first in our family to attend a prestigious university, and I did everything I could to help him get there. I worked extra shifts, cut back on personal expenses, and sacrificed my own leisure time so that I could provide for his tuition. His father, Charles, had been ill by that time, and it was up to me to ensure that Michael had the education and opportunities that I never had. But as time went on, something shifted in Michael. He had always been a kind and considerate boy, but as he grew older, the warmth in his eyes seemed to fade. The more I gave, the more I sacrificed, the more he seemed to take it for granted. He graduated, found a job, and married Rachel, a woman I had hoped would bring balance to his life. But I soon realized that Rachel was not the partner I had hoped for him. She was controlling, selfish, and indifferent to the sacrifices I had made. Yet, I tried to keep the peace, tried to make things work, even as I felt my role in their lives diminishing. The turning point came when I had my stroke. I was never one to show weakness, never one to ask for help. I had prided myself on being independent, capable, and strong. But the stroke changed everything. It robbed me of my independence, my ability to care for myself, and my confidence. The doctors advised me to move in with Michael and Rachel, at least temporarily, until I regained my strength. I had hoped that they would be the support I needed, that they would take care of me as I had once taken care of them. But instead of finding comfort, I found isolation. Instead of being welcomed into their home, I became an unwelcome guest. Michael and Rachel never asked me how I was feeling, never offered to help with anything more than the basics. I was simply in the way. I was no longer the capable woman they had known. I had become a burden, something to be tolerated until I could no longer be useful. And the moment I moved in, I began to feel that shift. The shift from beloved family member to unwanted guest. I had spent my whole life working, helping, supporting, and now here I was in the cold. The realization hit me like a slap in the face. I was no longer needed, no longer valued. I was just an inconvenience to be tucked away in the garage, out of sight, out of mind. They had stopped seeing me as their mother, as the woman who had spent years ensuring their well-being. To them, I was a problem, a weight they didn't want to carry. As I sat in the garage, I couldn't help but feel betrayed. The years I had dedicated to raising Michael, the sacrifices I had made for his future, seemed to count for nothing. I had given him everything, and in return, he had placed me in the coldest corner of his life. My heart ached, not just from the physical pain of the stroke, but from the emotional weight of the abandonment. I thought back to the days when I had been strong, when I had been the one in charge, the one who made things happen. The woman who ran a courtroom with precision and authority, the woman who kept everything together for her family, was now lying in a garage, forgotten. It felt like a cruel joke, one that I could not escape. But as the days passed, I realized something. This wasn't just about being cold, about being placed in the garage. It was about my worth, my place in the world, and the role I had allowed others to assign to me. I had always been the giver, the caregiver, the one who worked behind the scenes. But now, I needed to take control of my own life again. I needed to remember who I was, to remember that I still had value. And the first step was to stop feeling sorry for myself. I had lived a life of service, and I was proud of it. But now, I had to remember that I was worthy of respect. I was not a burden, and I would not be treated as one. The time had come for me to reclaim my life, my dignity, and my place in this world. The stroke that changed everything. The stroke came suddenly, like a thief in the night, stealing away the control I had always prided myself on. One moment, I was working through a pile of case files in my office, focused and methodical as usual. The next, a strange sensation spread through my arm, my vision blurred, and my head felt heavy, like it was full of cotton. I remember trying to call out, but my voice seemed muffled, as though the air itself had thickened around me. The world tilted, and then everything went black. I woke up in a hospital bed, the sterile, unwelcoming smell of antiseptic filling the air. I didn't know what had happened at first, only that something had gone terribly wrong. My left side was numb, and I couldn't move my fingers or feel my toes. The doctors spoke to me in gentle, sympathetic tones, explaining that I had suffered a stroke, a blockage in the blood vessels that had caused my body to stop responding the way it should. The doctors were optimistic, but I wasn't. I had always been independent, self-sufficient, and in control of my own life. I didn't need help from anyone, or so I had convinced myself. But now I was a prisoner in my own body, and there was nothing I could do to break free. For the first time in my life, I was forced to depend on others. Michael came to visit me in the hospital every day, his face drawn with worry, his eyes filled with concern. Rachel, his wife, came too, though she seemed more distant, as if she were simply going through the motions. I had never been close to her, and I began to sense that the distance between us was growing, expanding like a chasm that I couldn't bridge. Michael assured me that everything would be fine, that they would take care of me until I recovered. At the time, I believed him. I didn't want to be a burden. I didn't want to admit that I could no longer take care of myself. So when the doctors suggested that I move in with Michael and Rachel while I recovered, I agreed. I told myself it would only be temporary, that I would be fine once I regained my strength. I would walk again. I would resume my life. But things didn't go as planned. The first few days in their home were fine. Or at least, that's what I tried to convince myself. Michael and Rachel did what they could to help me with the basics, getting me meals, taking me to my appointments. But there was no warmth in their help. It felt transactional, like they were doing their duty, not because they cared, but because they felt they had to. I found myself more and more isolated in their home. My presence seemed to disrupt the natural rhythm of their lives, and I began to feel like an outsider in the very place I had once been so welcome. The stroke had taken more than just my physical abilities. It had taken my place in the family. For so many years I had been the strong one, the one who held everything together. Now I was the weak link, the one who needed assistance with the simplest tasks. Michael seemed to resent it. His patience was thin, and I could sense that his sympathy was quickly running out. Rachel, on the other hand, barely hid her disdain. I caught her rolling her eyes when I asked for help with something, and I could feel the tension in the air whenever she spoke to me. It was during this time that I began to notice the changes in Michael. The son I had raised to be kind, responsible, and respectful, had become someone unrecognizable. He started spending more time away from home, finding excuses not to visit me, not to be there when I needed him. Rachel, too, grew more distant. I had hoped that the love I had poured into their lives would be returned, but it felt as though they were both slowly pulling away from me. I had spent my entire life supporting Michael, making sacrifices for him, and yet here I was, alone and forgotten. After a few weeks, it became clear that I would not be able to return to my old life anytime soon. I would never be the same woman who had confidently walked into courtrooms, organized complex case files, and worked long hours without hesitation. The thought of being dependent on Michael and Rachel, of asking for their help for the rest of my life, filled me with dread. But what choice did I have? I could hardly move, and my mind, once sharp and quick, now felt clouded and slow. One morning, as I was sitting in the living room, staring out the window, I overheard Michael and Rachel talking in the kitchen. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but their conversation caught my attention. "She's not getting any better," Rachel said. "It's been over a month, and she's still not walking. She'll never be the same. Maybe we should just move her to the garage." I froze, the words striking me like a slap to the face. The garage. They were talking about me as if I were some unwanted piece of furniture, something to be shoved out of sight until it was convenient for them. The thought of being put in the garage, isolated from the rest of the house, was too much to bear. It was clear now that I wasn't welcome here. I tried to push the thought out of my mind, but the more I thought about it, the more it consumed me. How could they do this to me? How could they, after everything I had done for them, treat me this way? I had given up so much for Michael, for Rachel, and now I was being discarded like an old, worn-out coat. The days that followed were filled with a cold, oppressive silence. I could feel the walls closing in around me, both literally and figuratively. Michael's visits became fewer, his once warm and loving nature replaced by cold indifference. Rachel, too, seemed to be avoiding me, spending more time on her phone or with friends. I could tell they were getting tired of having me around, tired of the inconvenience I had become. But what hurt the most wasn't just the physical isolation, the coldness of the garage. It was the emotional betrayal. I had given everything for my family, and now I was being cast aside. I began to realize that this wasn't just about a stroke or a loss of physical ability. It was about something deeper, something that cut to the heart of my very identity. I had spent my life defining myself by my ability to help others, to care for my family. But now I was being told that I no longer had any value, that I was no longer needed. I had been reduced to a burden, a problem to be dealt with. The thought of spending the rest of my life in this cold, empty garage, ignored and forgotten, was unbearable. But something inside me snapped. I couldn't just lie down and accept this fate. I had lived a life of service, a life of purpose. I had fought for justice, and I wasn't about to let my own family strip me of my dignity. It was time to take back control. The first night in the garage. The first night in the garage was colder than I had anticipated. When they first told me I would be sleeping in the garage, I had hoped it would be temporary, just a place to rest while I recovered. But as I lay on that thin folding cot, wrapped in a tattered blanket, I realized just how wrong I had been. This wasn't a temporary arrangement. This was where I would stay until they decided I was no longer a problem. The garage was cold, not just in temperature but in its emptiness. The walls were bare, save for some old shelves stacked with boxes of forgotten memories, things Michael and Rachel had accumulated over the years. The floor was covered in dust and sawdust, and there was no warmth, no light other than the faint glow from a single flashlight that hung from the wall. There were no windows to let in the sunlight, no sense of comfort or safety. The garage was a place where things went to be forgotten, discarded, and left behind. And now, I was one of those things. I lay on the cot, my back aching from the cold metal frame pressing against me. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders, but it did little to stave off the chill. The air felt damp, and the musty smell of old tools and forgotten boxes filled my nostrils. I could hear the muffled sound of voices coming from the house. Michael and Rachel talking, laughing, living their lives. I wondered if they even thought about me anymore. Did they even care? As the night stretched on, I could feel the weight of my thoughts pressing on me. I had worked so hard my entire life. I had been a court secretary for 47 years, serving the justice system with unwavering dedication. I had been respected, trusted, and valued. But now, here I was, lying in a cold, empty garage, a shadow of the person I once was. I could feel my mind slipping away, the stroke having taken much more from me than just my ability to walk. It had taken my confidence, my sense of self-worth. I had become invisible. The hours seemed to stretch on forever. I had no idea how I was supposed to sleep in this cold, barren place. There was no comfort, no security, just the constant reminder that I had been cast aside. I thought about my life before the stroke, before I had become this fragile version of myself. I had been strong, capable, someone others could rely on. I had always been the one to help others, to take care of my family. But now, I was the one in need, the one being neglected. I couldn't help but feel the deep ache of abandonment in my chest. My family had always been my everything. I had given so much of myself to them, sacrificed my time, my energy, my own happiness for their well-being. And yet, now that I needed them, they had turned away from me. Michael, my son, the person I had poured my love and energy into, had become someone I hardly recognized. The kindness I had once seen in him had faded, replaced by frustration and cold indifference. Rachel, too, had grown distant, as though my presence in their home was an inconvenience. The more I thought about it, the more the reality of my situation sank in. I wasn't just in the garage physically. I was in the garage emotionally as well. I had been pushed aside, ignored, and left to fend for myself. The love I had given, the sacrifices I had made, they didn't seem to matter anymore. I had spent my life taking care of others, and now, there was no one left to take care of me. But despite the overwhelming sadness, I refused to give in. I couldn't. I had spent my entire life fighting for justice, for fairness, for what was right. I wasn't about to let my own family strip me of my dignity. I may have been in this garage, but I was not going to let them win. They thought they could bury me here, out of sight, out of mind. But they were wrong. I still had my mind, and I still had my voice. I wasn't going to let them take that away from me. The night passed slowly, and eventually, I heard the house grow quiet. Michael and Rachel had gone to bed, leaving me alone in the dark, in the cold. I lay there, staring up at the ceiling beams, feeling the tears well up in my eyes. But I refused to let them fall. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to let them see me break. Instead, I focused on the one thing I could control: my mind. I closed my eyes and tried to calm myself, to still the racing thoughts in my head. I thought about all the things I had done in my life, how I had helped so many people, how I had made a difference. I had worked in the courthouse for decades, managing case files, organizing hearings, helping to ensure that justice was served. I had been an integral part of the legal system, and I had earned the respect of my colleagues. I wasn't just some old woman lying in a garage. I was more than that. I had value. And that realization sparked something within me. It was small at first, just a flicker of determination. But as I lay there, shivering in the cold, I began to feel a sense of resolve building inside me. I wasn't going to let this be my fate. I wasn't going to let Michael and Rachel treat me like this. I still had a life to live, and I still had the strength to fight for it. The first night in the garage was a test. It was a test of endurance, of resilience, of my will to survive. And as I lay there, feeling the cold seep into my bones, I knew that I would survive. I may have been forgotten, abandoned, but I would not be silenced. I had spent my life fighting for what was right, and now it was time to fight for myself. In the quiet darkness, I made a vow. I would not let this be my end. I would find a way to reclaim my dignity, my life, and my place in this world, and I would do it on my terms. The silent betrayal. The following days in the garage passed in a haze of coldness and isolation. The harsh reality of my situation set in like a frost that wouldn't melt. Michael's visits became shorter, less frequent, and I began to feel as though I was fading into the background of their lives. Rachel, too, seemed to have all but forgotten about me, her focus solely on herself and whatever it was that occupied her attention. I was nothing more than an inconvenience to them, a burden they had reluctantly agreed to carry. One evening, as I lay in the cold garage, wrapped in the same thin blanket I had been using since I arrived, I overheard Michael and Rachel talking in the kitchen. They hadn't realized I could hear them, but their voices carried through the thin walls. I was accustomed to their hushed, tense conversations, but this time was different. This time, the words were filled with something darker, something more calculated. "She's still here, Michael. She hasn't even tried to get better. It's been weeks, and she's still stuck in that chair." Rachel's voice was sharp, tinged with frustration. "What do we even do with her now?" Michael's voice followed, sounding more annoyed than concerned. "I don't know. She won't listen to us. She doesn't get it. We've done everything we can for her, but she's just too much." Rachel's tone softened, but there was no warmth in it. "Maybe we should just move her to the garage for good. I mean, it's better than having her in the house, right? At least there she won't be underfoot all the time." A chill ran down my spine as I lay motionless on the cot, pretending to sleep, my hands clenched tightly by my side. The words stung more than I expected, the harshness of their plans cutting into me like a knife. I had known they resented me, that I was no longer the person they once depended on, but hearing it spoken so plainly, so callously, made me realize just how little I meant to them now. I had become nothing more than a burden to them, someone to be hidden away, discarded when I was no longer useful. What hurt the most, however, was the realization that my son, the person I had given so much for, had become someone I barely recognized. The boy I had once known, the child I had raised with love and sacrifice, had grown into a man who would rather hide me away than care for me. I had spent my life supporting him, cheering for him, encouraging him. And yet now, he was the one who had placed me in this cold garage, locked away from their lives, out of sight and out of mind. Rachel's voice cut through my thoughts again. "I mean, we're already doing so much for her. We've got the space heater in there and she has her bed. She'll be fine. It's just a matter of her getting used to it. We can't keep playing nursemaid forever." Michael didn't respond immediately, but I could hear him shifting, perhaps pouring another cup of coffee. I know, but it's not like we can just toss her out on the street. We'll have to deal with it somehow. Maybe we just wait until she's no longer competent. Then we can take care of everything. Sell the house, take control of her finances. We can finally be rid of her without the hassle of dealing with power of attorney. The air in the garage seemed to thicken with the weight of their words. I wanted to scream, to charge into the kitchen and confront them. How could they say such things? How could they treat me, their mother, this way? I had given them everything, and this was how they repaid me. This wasn't just about a stroke or about my health. It was about something deeper. It was about betrayal, about the cold, calculating way they had turned their backs on me, the very person who had given them everything. But I didn't move. I couldn't. Instead, I stayed still, my eyes wide open, my hands trembling beneath the blanket. I could hear the muffled sounds of their voices as they continued their discussion, as if they were making plans for a piece of furniture they were no longer interested in. The realization was too much to bear. They weren't just hiding me in the garage. They were planning to strip me of everything I had worked my entire life to build. My house, my assets, my dignity. It would all be taken from me, and I would be nothing more than a forgotten relic of their past. That night, I lay awake long after the voices in the kitchen had faded. I couldn't sleep, not with the weight of their words pressing down on me. The thought of them scheming behind my back, plotting to take everything I had worked for, made my blood boil. But even as the anger surged inside me, another quieter feeling began to take root. Fear. Fear that they would succeed. Fear that I would lose everything, that I would have no way to fight back. But in that moment, I knew something else. I couldn't let that happen. I had spent my entire life fighting for justice, for what was right. I had spent my career standing up for others, ensuring that the law was upheld, that people received the justice they deserved. And now, it was time for me to stand up for myself. I couldn't let Michael and Rachel get away with this. I couldn't let them strip me of everything I had fought for. I knew I had to do something. I didn't know exactly what that something was yet, but I knew I couldn't just lie down and accept this fate. I couldn't let them win. They thought they could bury me in the garage, out of sight, out of mind. But I would make sure they remembered who I was. I would make sure they remembered the woman who had spent her life in service of others, who had fought for justice when no one else would. And so, as I lay there in the cold, feeling the tears well up in my eyes, I made a vow. I would not let them take everything from me. I would fight for what was mine. I would fight for my dignity, my home, and my future. I would not be silenced. Not now, not ever. Memories of better days. The days in the garage blurred into one another, each feeling colder and more isolating than the last. I had always been proud of my ability to maintain composure, to handle adversity with grace. But now, in this suffocating silence, I found myself unraveling in ways I had never anticipated. As the days passed, I began to lose my sense of time. Morning and night became indistinguishable, the only markers being the faint sounds that drifted in from the house, distant laughter, the clink of glasses, the murmur of conversation, and always, always, the cold. But it wasn't just the cold that wore me down. It was the weight of the memories of better days. I found myself retreating into the past, seeking solace in the years when I was strong, when I was vital, when my presence in the world meant something. I could still hear the echo of my voice in the courtroom, the rhythmic tap of my fingers on the typewriter, the rush of adrenaline before a big case. Those were the days when I felt alive, when I knew that I was making a difference. Now, I was here, in the dark, forgotten by the people I had once poured my life into. I thought back to the years when I worked as a court secretary, before the stroke took away my independence. I remembered the smell of fresh paper, the sound of my heels clicking against the polished floors of the courthouse. I had been proud of the work I did, proud of the role I played in ensuring justice was served. I had worked alongside judges, attorneys, and law enforcement officers, earning their respect and admiration. I was a part of something important, something bigger than myself, and I had loved every minute of it. But now, all I had left were these memories, these fleeting moments of purpose, of meaning, of life. I closed my eyes and could almost hear the hum of the courtroom, the rustle of legal documents, the voices of the attorneys presenting their cases. I remembered the faces of the judges, their sharp eyes watching every word, every gesture. They relied on me, trusted me to keep everything in order, to make sure nothing fell through the cracks. And I had never let them down. Not once. I thought of Michael, too, my son, the boy I had raised with love and care. I remembered his first steps, the way he would run to me after school, full of excitement about his day. I remember his little hand in mine as we walked through the park, his innocent questions about life. I had spent years nurturing him, teaching him, giving him everything I had. I had sacrificed my own dreams so that he could chase his. I gave him the best of me, and now, here I was, discarded like an old coat. How had we arrived here? How had I gone from being a source of pride for my son to a burden he could no longer bear? The more I thought about it, the more the ache in my heart deepened. I had been the center of his world once, but now I was a problem, a nuisance, someone to be hidden away. And then there was Charles, my late husband, the love of my life. I could still hear his voice, the way he would laugh at my jokes, the way he held me when I cried. We had shared so much together, the highs and the lows, the triumphs and the struggles. We had been partners in everything, facing life's challenges hand in hand. But now, he was gone, and I was left to face the world alone. I thought of the way his hand had held mine in the hospital when I had my stroke, the look of concern in his eyes as the doctors explained my condition. He had been my rock, my constant. And now, I had no one. The memories were a double-edged sword. They brought me comfort, yes, but they also reminded me of everything I had lost. I could no longer walk the halls of the courthouse, no longer provide for my family, no longer feel useful. And now, even my own son had turned his back on me. I had given so much of myself to others, and now I had nothing left. But I refused to let these memories consume me. I couldn't let the past define me. I had spent too many years living for others, too many years putting my own needs aside in favor of everyone else's. It was time to take back control, to stop mourning what I had lost and start fighting for what I still had. I still had my mind, my memories, and my strength. And I was going to use them. I could hear the laughter from the house again, faint and distant. But it was there. Michael and Rachel were enjoying themselves, living their lives as though nothing had changed. I wondered if they even thought about me. Did they miss me? Did they feel any guilt for what they had done? I didn't know, and I didn't care. What mattered now was that I still had a chance to reclaim my life. I still had a voice, and I wasn't going to let it be silenced. The stroke had taken so much from me, but it hadn't taken everything. I was still here. I was still fighting, and I was going to keep fighting until I got back what was mine. I stood up slowly from the cot, the familiar pain in my legs, reminding me of how far I had fallen. But I refused to let it stop me. I might not be able to walk like I used to, but I could still move forward. I could still plan, still think, still act. I walked over to the small desk in the corner of the garage, a forgotten relic of Michael's childhood. It had been his, I remembered, before he left for college. It had sat in the corner of his room, a place for his toys and papers. Now it was just another piece of the past, covered in dust. But it was something I could use. I sat down at the desk, my hands trembling as I picked up a pen. I wasn't sure what I was going to write, but I knew I had to do something. I had to take action. I began to write, slowly at first, but then with more purpose. The words came to me, not in a rush, but in a steady flow, like a dam finally breaking. I was writing for myself, writing for the woman I used to be, the woman I still was, deep inside. I wrote about the life I had led, the family I had built, and the injustice I had endured. I wrote about the memories of better days, but also about the hope for the future I would still fight for. The garage may have been cold, but my resolve was growing warmer. I was not done. I had lived too long, fought too hard to give up now. This was only the beginning. A desperate plan. In the days that followed, the bitterness of betrayal and abandonment began to settle deep within me. The garage, once a temporary solution, had become my prison. I had spent so much of my life taking care of everyone else, making sure Michael had everything he needed, sacrificing my own dreams for his success. But now, he and Rachel were treating me as if I was disposable, just another burden to push aside. I had heard the whispered plans, the talk about moving me out of the house, out of sight, out of mind. I knew I couldn't let that happen. I had been silent for so long, quiet out of a misguided sense of respect and politeness. But that silence had only allowed the cruelty to continue. I couldn't let them erase me from their lives like this. I had spent too many years fighting for justice, standing up for what was right. And now it was my turn to fight. This time, I would fight for myself. But I knew that I couldn't fight blindly. I had to be strategic. If I was going to take back control, I needed to have a plan, something concrete, something that could give me a fighting chance. And that's when the idea came to me. I had always prided myself on my ability to organize, to strategize, to think ahead. In my years as a court secretary, I had seen enough to know that sometimes the quietest voices were the most powerful. I didn't need to shout, to scream, to cause a scene. I needed to gather evidence, proof of the betrayal, of the cruelty they had shown me. I needed to document everything, to ensure that when the time came, I would have the upper hand. The first step was to get my hands on some form of a recording device. I couldn't just rely on my memory. I had to have the words, the conversations, the evidence that would make it impossible for them to deny what they had done. But how could I do that from the confines of the garage? How could I get anything to help me when I was isolated, cut off from the world? I thought back to the days when I had helped prepare legal documents, when I had worked with attorneys, judges, and law enforcement. I remembered the legal pads, the old-fashioned filing systems, the endless stacks of paperwork. In some ways, this situation felt familiar. In the past, I had been the one organizing case files, gathering evidence, and preparing the truth to be presented in court. Now, it was my turn to gather evidence, but this time, it was for my own case. I spent hours in the garage, going through the piles of old boxes and papers Michael had left behind. I found a dusty, old toy chest that belonged to my granddaughter, filled with trinkets and childhood keepsakes. But beneath it, hidden away, was something that could help me. A small, forgotten tablet that Michael had left behind after a long-forgotten family gathering. The screen was cracked, but it still worked. The tablet had a camera, a microphone, and Wi-Fi capability. It was a small thing, but in my situation, it was everything. I felt a surge of hope as I powered it up, the screen flickering to life. I had no idea how to use it properly, but I had to figure it out. I couldn't let this opportunity slip away. I quickly began to learn how to use the tablet, setting it up in a way that would allow me to record the conversations that I had overheard and those I was sure would come. The voice recordings would be my weapon, my evidence. With the tablet, I could finally document what had been happening behind closed doors. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. With the tablet set up and ready, I began my surveillance. I knew I couldn't confront Michael and Rachel directly. Not yet. I had to wait for the right moment. But I couldn't just sit here in silence any longer. I had to take action. Every day, I sat in the garage, pretending to sleep, pretending to be resigned to my fate. All the while, I kept the tablet running, recording everything that was said. The sound of their voices grew clearer with each passing day, and I listened, memorizing their words, their plans. One evening, after Michael and Rachel had spent hours in the kitchen, laughing and talking about their weekend plans, I heard them speak more openly. Michael was frustrated, and Rachel's voice carried an edge I hadn't heard before. "I can't believe she's still here," Rachel said, her tone sharp. "She's not getting any better. She's just holding us back. We can't keep living like this." Michael's response was cold, almost detached. "I know, but we can't just throw her out. She's our responsibility. We have to wait until we can get proof she's not competent. Once we have that, we can take control. We can move forward, sell the house, and deal with all of it. But not until she's out of the picture." The words hit me like a slap in the face. They weren't just talking about moving me to the garage. They were talking about taking everything I had, my home, my possessions, my life. They wanted to control everything, to strip me of my autonomy, my rights. They didn't just want to push me out of their house. They wanted to erase me from their lives entirely. But this time, I wouldn't let them. I had been gathering the evidence, storing the recordings, and now I was ready to take action. I reached for my phone and called an old friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, but someone I trusted implicitly. Her name was Frances, and she had been a lead clerk in the family court division when I worked there. She was sharp, unyielding, and knew the ins and outs of the legal system better than anyone I had ever known. She was also someone who had always stood up for what was right, no matter the consequences. When she answered the phone, I could hear the surprise in her voice. "Eleanor?" she said, incredulous. "It's been years. What's going on?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself before I spoke. "Frances, I need your help. I've been wronged, and I need you to help me set things right." For the first time in days, I felt a sense of purpose. Frances was the one person who could help me navigate the legal system, the one person who could guide me through this. I wasn't alone anymore. I had a plan, and I wasn't going to let them take everything from me. The fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Recording the evidence. The days following my conversation with Frances were filled with quiet anticipation. I had made the decision, and now it was time to take action. No longer was I just the helpless woman in the garage. No longer would I allow Michael and Rachel to think they could get away with their cruel treatment. I was ready to fight, and I had the means to do so. The tablet I had found was now my most valuable ally, the key to unraveling their plans and proving their betrayal. I had never been one to let my emotions dictate my actions, but this was different. I wasn't just fighting for my dignity anymore. I was fighting for my very existence. Michael and Rachel had taken away my home, my family, my independence, and now they were plotting to strip me of everything I had left. They thought I was powerless, but they were wrong. I had years of experience in the legal world, and I knew how to collect evidence, how to build a case. It was time to use my skills for myself. Each night, I sat in the cold, dimly lit garage, quietly watching and listening. The tablet was hidden in a place where no one would notice it. I kept it on a shelf near a pile of old boxes, just another piece of the clutter that had accumulated over the years. The tablet's camera and microphone were always running, capturing every conversation, every word, every whisper. It was my insurance, my way of ensuring that the truth would come to light, no matter how hard they tried to bury it. It wasn't easy to remain calm and composed during this time. Every conversation I overheard filled me with a deep sense of anger and betrayal. But I had to stay focused. I couldn't afford to make a mistake. If I was going to reclaim my life, if I was going to take control of this situation, I needed to stay sharp. Every word I heard, every piece of evidence I gathered, brought me one step closer to the justice I deserved. One evening, I heard Michael and Rachel talking again. It was late, the house was quiet, and the conversation they had didn't carry the usual casual tone. This time, it was different, darker. "I can't believe she's still here, Michael." Rachel's voice dripped with contempt. "She hasn't even tried to get better. It's been over a month now and nothing has changed. She's a drain on everything." Michael's response was equally cold. "I know, Rachel, but we can't just kick her out. Not yet. We have to wait until we can prove she's incompetent. We get that medical assessment, and then we'll have everything we need. We can take full control, and the house is ours." I couldn't believe my ears. They were talking about me like I wasn't even in the room, like I wasn't a human being, but a problem to be solved. The words stung, but I knew I had to keep my composure. I was no longer their mother, their family. To them, I was a pawn in a game where they were determined to win at all costs. Rachel's voice cut through the silence again. "I just want her out of the house. I want my life back, Michael. I didn't sign up for this." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Rachel had never cared about me. She had never cared about my sacrifices, about the love I had shown her and Michael. All of it was a facade, a mask she wore to fit into the life they had built together. But now, the mask was slipping. Now, I saw her for what she truly was: cold, calculating, and willing to do anything to get what she wanted. I kept the tablet running, recording every word they said. The more they talked, the more I realized just how much they had planned, just how deep their betrayal went. They were not just taking my house, my belongings. They were taking control of my life. And I couldn't let that happen. The next few days were spent in careful observation. I had to remain silent, passive, pretending to be the weak, frail woman they had expected me to be. But inside, I was growing stronger. With each passing day, I became more determined. The tablet was my secret weapon, my lifeline to the truth. I knew it wouldn't be long before I had enough evidence to confront them. It wasn't just about the house or the possessions they were after. It was about something much more important. My voice. They had tried to silence me, to erase me from their lives, as if I were nothing more than an inconvenience. But I wasn't going to let that happen. I had worked too hard, given too much, to let them strip me of my identity. One afternoon, I overheard another conversation. This time, it was Rachel speaking in a hushed voice to someone on the phone. Her words were filled with calculated malice. "Yeah, we're still waiting for the second doctor's report. Once we get that, we can apply for guardianship. Michael and I can take full control of her finances, of everything. She won't be able to do anything about it." My heart pounded in my chest. They were serious. They were going to do whatever it took to take everything from me. The anger that had been building inside me erupted, but I forced myself to stay calm. I knew what I had to do. I had to take this fight to the courts. I had to make sure they couldn't get away with what they were planning. As the days went by, I continued to gather the evidence, to record every conversation, every word, every whisper. The more I listened, the more I understood just how deep their cruelty ran. They weren't just trying to take my house, they were trying to take my life. They wanted to control me, to erase me from their world entirely. But I wasn't going to let that happen. I had the evidence now. I had the proof I needed to fight back. It was time to take the next step. It was time to bring the truth to light. I sent the recordings to Frances, my trusted friend from my days in the courthouse. She had always been a voice of reason, someone who understood the law and knew how to navigate the system. I wasn't alone anymore. I had the support I needed to fight back. And with Frances by my side, I knew we could win. The tablet was no longer just a tool. It was my weapon in the battle for my future. I wasn't just fighting for a house. I was fighting for my dignity, my freedom, and my right to be heard. And I was going to make sure that, no matter what, my voice would be the one that was finally heard. Turning the tables, the weight of the evidence I had gathered hung heavily in my hands, but with each passing day, my resolve grew stronger. I had been patient, watching, listening, gathering the pieces of a puzzle I hadn't wanted to complete. Now, those pieces were beginning to form a clearer picture, one that showed exactly how deep the betrayal ran. I had spent most of my life serving the law, ensuring that justice prevailed for others. Now justice had become a personal matter. It wasn't just about the house or the control they sought over my finances. It wasn't just about the fact that they wanted to erase me from their lives. It was about the deeper betrayal, the violation of everything I had taught them, everything I had sacrificed for them. I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't stay silent while they plotted against me, thinking I wouldn't notice, thinking I wouldn't fight back. They had made a grave mistake in underestimating me. I wasn't just a fragile old woman in the garage, waiting to fade away. I was the woman who had served the courts for decades, the woman who had helped others fight for justice. I knew how to navigate this system. I had the experience, the knowledge, and now I had the proof. The recordings I had made were more than just words. They were a weapon. They were my shield. I had the conversations, the admissions of guilt, and the cold calculations of Michael and Rachel, all laid bare for the world to see. It was time to act, to turn the tables and make them realize that they had made a mistake. The first step was reaching out to Frances. It had been years since we had spoken, but I knew she was the one person who would understand, who would help me make sense of the mess I was now in. She had been a lead clerk in family court, someone who knew the ins and outs of the legal system better than anyone. She was sharp, tenacious, and above all, she cared about justice. When I called Frances, my voice was steady, though my heart raced with the weight of what I was about to do. "Frances," I began, "I need your help. I've been wronged, and I have the proof. It's time to take action." Her voice on the other end of the line was filled with disbelief, but there was no hesitation. "Eleanor, what's going on? Tell me everything." And I did. I explained what had been happening, from the moment I had moved in with Michael and Rachel, to the cruel words I had overheard, the way they had plotted to take control of my life. I told her about the recordings, about the conversations I had captured, the plans they had made to strip me of everything I had worked for. I could hear Frances's sharp intake of breath as I spoke, but she didn't interrupt me. She listened, and when I finished, she gave me the reassurance I needed. "I'll help you," Frances said firmly. "This is despicable. You have enough evidence to go to court. We'll file for a restraining order, a financial freeze, everything you need, but you have to be prepared, Eleanor. This isn't going to be easy. They'll fight back." I knew she was right. Michael and Rachel wouldn't give up easily. They had planned this for too long, and now they were about to see the consequences of their actions. But I wasn't afraid. I had been through battles before, just not like this. This was personal, and I was determined to win. Over the next few days, Frances helped me gather the necessary paperwork, preparing the legal filings and organizing the recordings. We were building a case, piece by piece, using their own words against them. It was a delicate process. Every move had to be calculated. I couldn't afford to make any mistakes. While Frances worked on the legal side, I took a step back and began to prepare emotionally for what was coming. I couldn't let myself be consumed by anger or fear. I had to be focused, calm, and composed. I couldn't let Michael and Rachel see that they had gotten to me. I had to stay strong, for myself, and for what I knew was right. The moment of reckoning arrived when Frances called to tell me that everything was in place. We had the evidence. We had the legal filings. It was time to act. We filed for a temporary restraining order against Michael and Rachel, citing elder abuse, financial coercion, and unlawful living conditions. We also filed a motion for a financial freeze, ensuring that they couldn't access my assets or manipulate my finances during the investigation. It was a bold move, one that would undoubtedly send shockwaves through Michael and Rachel's world. But I wasn't afraid. I had the law on my side, and I had a fierce determination to see this through. The next few days felt like an eternity. I waited anxiously for the court's decision, wondering what would happen when the papers were served to Michael and Rachel. Would they fight back? Would they try to twist the situation to their advantage? I knew they would, but I also knew that they couldn't deny the truth that was now in front of them. The recordings were irrefutable. Their own words would expose them for the frauds they were. Finally, the day came. The court had granted the temporary restraining order, and the officers were ready to serve Michael and Rachel with the legal documents. The morning of the delivery, I stood in the kitchen, my heart pounding in my chest. I had prepared myself for this moment for weeks, but nothing could have fully prepared me for what was about to happen. The doorbell rang, and Michael went to answer it. He opened the door to find two officers standing on the porch, their badges gleaming in the morning light. My heart skipped a beat as I watched Michael's face fall, his confidence cracking. The officer spoke first, his voice steady. "Michael Harper, you've been served." I watched as Michael's face turned pale, as the weight of the situation settled in. The papers were handed to him, and Rachel, who had been standing behind him, gasped when she saw the contents of the legal documents. "What is this?" she asked, her voice trembling. The officer didn't answer. He simply turned and left, his job done. But for Michael and Rachel, the storm had just begun. For the first time, I felt a flicker of victory. The tables had turned. I had not only fought back, but I had done so with precision and strength. They had underestimated me, thinking I would remain silent, thinking they could get away with everything. But now, they were facing the consequences of their actions. The battle wasn't over, but it was mine to win. The day of reckoning. The weight of the papers in my hands was heavier than I had expected. As I watched Michael and Rachel stand frozen in their kitchen, their eyes wide with disbelief, I felt a mix of satisfaction and a deep, almost sorrowful, sense of justice. It had taken so much to get to this point. Months of silence, of suffering in the cold garage, of gathering evidence, of biding my time. But now, the truth had come crashing through their carefully constructed facade. Michael held the papers in his hand, looking at them as if they were foreign objects, as if they could somehow be denied, dismissed. His face, usually full of arrogance and entitlement, was pale, his lips trembling. Rachel, too, stood there, her mouth slightly open, as if trying to make sense of the unfolding scene. I didn't need to say anything. The legal papers, the restraining order, the motion for a financial freeze, spoke for themselves. They were the culmination of everything I had endured, everything I had fought for. And now, Michael and Rachel were going to face the consequences of their actions. I stood there, my heart racing, but my resolve firm. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my life, and my voice. For so long, I had allowed them to control the narrative, to push me into the background. But today, that was going to change. Today, I would be heard. "You're not serious," Michael said, his voice barely a whisper, his usual confidence replaced by confusion and fear. "You can't be." I didn't respond at first. There was nothing left to say. The evidence was clear. I had the recordings, I had the proof, and now I had the law on my side. I wasn't going to beg for their understanding or approval anymore. They had treated me like a stranger in my own home, a burden to be disposed of. They had thought I was weak, that I wouldn't fight back. But they were wrong. The silence in the room was thick, suffocating. I could feel my pulse in my throat, my hands clenched tightly at my sides. The emotions I had buried deep inside were rising to the surface: anger, betrayal, and a quiet sense of triumph. I had won. This was justice, and it had been a long time coming. Rachel was the first to speak, her voice high-pitched and sharp. "You think this is going to solve anything?" she demanded. "You think you can just come in here and take control? You're nothing but an old woman who doesn't know what she's doing. We're trying to help you." The words were empty. The help they had offered wasn't help, it was control. They hadn't been trying to care for me. They had been trying to take what was mine. And now, the tables had turned. I wasn't the helpless old woman they had hoped I would be. I wasn't going to be their victim any longer. "You're not going to get away with this," Rachel continued, her voice growing more frantic. "You think this will stop us? You think we'll just give up? This is our house, our life. You don't have a say in it." For a moment, I thought about the years I had spent helping them, sacrificing so much of myself so they could have everything they wanted. I thought about all the quiet hours I had spent, supporting them, loving them. And yet, here I was, standing in front of them, holding the very papers that would strip them of their power. I wasn't just fighting for my home. I was fighting for the respect I had earned, for the dignity I had lost. "I don't want your house, Rachel," I said quietly, my voice steady and clear. "I want my life back. I want to be treated with the respect I deserve. I've given you everything, and this is how you repay me?" Rachel's face turned bright red, the anger in her eyes bubbling over. "You're insane," she spat. "You don't know what you're talking about. You're delusional." It didn't matter what she said anymore. The truth was out. I could see it in Michael's face. The fear, the disbelief. He had thought he could control everything. He had thought I would just fade away, quietly, like an old piece of furniture that had outlived its usefulness. But he had underestimated me. They both had. Just then, there was a knock on the door. 2 officers stood outside, holding their badges in their hands. I had arranged for them to come at the right moment to ensure that everything went smoothly. Michael and Rachel weren't just going to get a warning. They were going to feel the full weight of the law. "Michael Harper, Rachel Harper," one of the officers said as they stepped inside. "You've been served. The court has issued a restraining order against both of you, and there will be a temporary freeze on all financial assets pending an investigation. The words hit Michael like a punch to the gut. He looked at me, his expression a mix of anger and confusion, as if he still couldn't quite understand what was happening. But there was no going back now. The law was on my side, and they had no choice but to comply. "You're not serious," Michael said again, but this time his voice was weaker, more desperate. "You can't do this to us. We're family." "Family doesn't treat each other like this," I replied, my voice unwavering. "Family doesn't push each other away when things get difficult. Family doesn't plot to take control of someone's life." The officers stood quietly, allowing the words to sink in. There was no argument left to be made. Michael and Rachel were caught in their own web of lies, and now they had to face the consequences. As the officers handed them the documents, Michael's face twisted with anger. "You'll regret this," he muttered, but it was hollow, empty. "I don't think so," I said, finally finding the strength to speak the truth that had been buried inside me for so long. "This isn't about revenge, Michael. It's about justice. It's about making sure that people like you don't get away with hurting those who love them." I turned to walk away, but then I stopped. I looked at Michael and Rachel one last time. "I loved you both. I gave you everything I had. But this is where it ends. You don't get to control me anymore." The officers escorted Michael and Rachel out of the house, and I stood there in the quiet aftermath, feeling a strange sense of peace. The fight wasn't over. It would take time for everything to unfold, for the courts to settle everything. But for the first time in months, I felt like I had regained control of my life. The house was still theirs, but the power had shifted. I had made my stand, and I had taken back my voice, and in the end, that was all I needed. The emotional struggle. The days following the confrontation with Michael and Rachel were a blur. On the outside, it seemed like everything was in motion: lawyers, court orders, restraining actions. But on the inside, it was like I had been ripped open, the emotions I had kept buried for so long flooding to the surface. The anger, the betrayal, the sadness, the confusion, everything hit me at once. I had spent years putting my family first, bending over backwards to make sure Michael and Rachel had everything they needed, and now, here I was, fighting for my dignity and my life in a way I had never imagined. It wasn't just about the house. It wasn't just about the control they wanted to take over my finances or my medical decisions. It was about love. It was about everything I had poured into them, and how it felt to see that love trampled on, dismissed as if it meant nothing. In some ways, that was the hardest part to accept, the emotional betrayal. I had spent so many years being strong for everyone else, for Michael, for my family, for my friends. I had been the rock, the one who always knew what to do, who could weather any storm. But now, in the cold garage, I felt like everything had been stripped away. The stroke had already taken so much from me: my independence, my physical strength, my ability to care for myself. But it was the emotional toll that was harder to bear. The person who had always been in control of everything now felt completely powerless. It wasn't just the physical isolation that hurt. It was the emotional isolation. Being alone in that garage was a constant reminder that Michael and Rachel didn't care about me. They didn't see me as someone who had once been strong, someone who had dedicated her life to them. They didn't see the mother who had sacrificed so much to give Michael a better life. They saw me as a problem, as a burden, something to be hidden away and forgotten. The worst part was knowing that I had allowed it to go on for as long as it had. I had let them push me aside, let them treat me as if I didn't matter. I had been so afraid of causing conflict, of creating tension in the family, that I had kept my mouth shut for too long. I had let them think they could control me, and I had let them dictate the terms of our relationship. And in the end, it was me who had suffered the most. But now, I was fighting back. And as much as the anger burned inside me, there was something else as well, something deeper. There was a part of me that was still mourning, still grieving the loss of the family I had once known. I didn't want to fight with Michael. I didn't want to tear apart what had once been a close-knit family. I wanted him to be the son I had raised, the son who had once hugged me after every school event, the son who had made me proud. But that son was gone. The person standing before me now was someone I didn't recognize. And that hurt more than I could put into words. I thought about the years I had spent caring for him, sacrificing my own time and energy to make sure he had everything he needed. The late nights I spent working to help him with his homework, the weekends I gave up to drive him to activities and events. I had always been there for him, always put him first. But in the end, it wasn't enough. He had moved on, and I had been left behind. What was harder to accept was the way Rachel had been involved in all of this. I had never fully trusted her. I had always felt that something was off about her, that she saw me as an obstacle to her own ambitions. But I had never imagined she could be so cold, so callous. The way she spoke about me, like I was nothing more than an inconvenience, a problem to be dealt with, was something I couldn't forget. She had taken everything I had given, and in return, she had treated me like I didn't matter. The woman I had tried to welcome into my family had been the one to help Michael push me aside. The emotional toll of it all was staggering. I had always been someone who prided herself on her strength. I had survived the loss of my husband, the challenges of raising Michael on my own, the struggles of balancing work and family. But this was different. This was a betrayal that went to the very heart of who I was. It wasn't just the physical coldness of the garage that hurt, it was the emotional freeze that had settled in my heart. But I couldn't stay in that place of sadness forever. I knew that. I had to keep moving forward. The anger that had been building inside me, the desire for justice, needed to be channeled into action. I couldn't let myself drown in the past, in the pain of what I had lost. I had to keep fighting, not just for my home or my finances, but for myself, for my own sense of self-worth. The hardest part was acknowledging that I wasn't fighting for Michael anymore. I had spent so much of my life trying to be the perfect mother, trying to give him everything he wanted, to be there for him when he needed me. But now, it was clear that he wasn't the same person. He wasn't the son I had raised. He was a man who had made his choices, who had decided that his ambitions were more important than the woman who had given him everything. And as much as that hurt, I knew it was the truth. And I had to accept it. I had a new mission now, one that was just as important as anything I had ever done. I was fighting for my dignity, for my voice, for the woman I had always been. I had spent my life giving to others, but now it was time to give something to myself. I had to be strong, not for them, but for me. As the days passed, the weight of my emotions began to settle, replaced by a quiet determination. I wasn't going to let them win. I wasn't going to let the years of love and sacrifice go to waste. I had a right to be treated with respect, and I was going to fight for that respect, no matter what it took. And so, with each passing day, I began to rebuild. The emotional struggle wasn't over, but I had learned to channel it into something powerful. I had my plan, I had my evidence, and I had a new sense of purpose. I was ready for whatever came next. ready to face the next battle. And this time, I wouldn't let anyone take me down without a fight. A new beginning. In the days that followed the legal proceedings, a strange quiet settled over me. The action I had taken, filing the legal motions, exposing Michael and Rachel's betrayal, had altered the course of my life, but it hadn't yet fully settled in. The weight of everything I had endured, everything I had fought for, lingered like a shadow in the corners of my mind. But with each passing day, the bitterness began to fade, replaced by something I hadn't expected. Peace. I didn't move back into the house after the legal documents had been served. It wasn't that I didn't still love that house. It had been my home for so many years. But the memories of how I had been treated there, the cruelty I had endured in the place I once called my sanctuary, were too much to bear. The house was no longer a refuge. It had become a prison, a symbol of the broken relationship between me and Michael. So, I made the decision not to return. Instead, with the help of Francis, I found a small apartment on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, just a 2-bedroom unit in a quiet neighborhood, but it was mine. It was mine in a way the house had never truly been. For the first time in months, I felt like I was in control of my life again. The apartment had a simple, calming quality to it. The walls were a soft beige, the furniture modest but comfortable. There was no grandeur, no pretensions, just a place where I could breathe freely. I moved in slowly, taking my time to arrange my things, to create a space that felt like home. My few cherished possessions, family photos, books, some heirlooms from my mother, were carefully placed around the apartment. The simplicity of it all was soothing. I didn't need anything more than this. At first, I was hesitant to let anyone know about the change. I had spent so much time feeling like a burden, like an afterthought in my own family, that the idea of sharing my new life with anyone felt strange. But over time, I found that I was slowly reconnecting with people who truly cared about me. I began to have more phone calls with old friends, people I hadn't spoken to in years. Some of them had heard about the legal battle, and they reached out to offer their support. They had seen me at my lowest, but now they saw the strength I was beginning to reclaim. And then there was Angela, my granddaughter. I had worried about her during the whole ordeal, concerned that she might be caught in the middle of the mess Michael and Rachel had created. But Angela was different. She had always been a bright, thoughtful child, and even now, as a young woman, she was the one person who understood me completely. Angela came to visit me regularly. She would bring me flowers, cook meals for me, and we would sit together and talk for hours. I could see the change in her, too. She was no longer the child who had slipped a note under the garage door, apologizing for something she hadn't done. She had grown into someone who stood up for what was right. Someone who understood the importance of family, but also knew when to cut ties with toxicity. It was Angela who helped me with the final steps of moving into my new apartment. She was there when I unpacked the last of my boxes, and she insisted on making my bed for me the way I had done for her when she was little. "You've done enough for everyone else, Grandma," she said, as she tucked in the sheets. "Now, it's time for you to have a little peace." Her words resonated with me deeply. I had spent so many years putting others first, giving my time, my energy, my love, without asking for anything in return. But now I was learning to focus on myself. I had learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is take care of yourself, to give yourself the same care and attention you so willingly give to others. I wasn't sure what the future would hold, but I knew one thing for sure. It was mine to shape. The days passed slowly, and with each one I felt the heaviness of the past lifting. I began to fill my time with things I had always loved but had set aside for far too long: reading, gardening, knitting. I found joy in the small things again. I didn't need grand gestures or complicated plans. All I needed was the freedom to live on my own terms. Of course, the legal battles weren't over yet. Michael and Rachel hadn't just accepted the court's decisions without a fight. They contested the restraining order, the financial freeze, and the guardianship issue. But that didn't matter as much to me anymore. I had taken the first step, and that was enough. Even if they fought back, I knew the truth would come out. I had fought for what was mine, and no one could take that away from me. The real victory wasn't in the papers or the legal rulings. It was in reclaiming my dignity, my voice. It was in standing up for myself after years of silence, of allowing others to walk over me. I had let Michael and Rachel make me feel small, but now I stood tall again. I had my life back, and that was all that mattered. One evening, as I sat in my new living room, looking out the window at the quiet street below, I realized just how far I had come. I had gone from being pushed into a cold garage, abandoned by my own family, to finding a space where I could finally breathe, where I could be myself again. The weight of the past was still with me, but it didn't define me. I had become something stronger, something more resilient. As I took another sip of my tea, I felt a sense of gratitude wash over me. Not for what I had lost, but for what I had found. I had found my strength again, my ability to fight for what was right, and most importantly, I had found peace. Angela came over later that week, bringing her usual warmth and laughter with her. We spent the evening together, talking and reminiscing about old times. I realized that despite everything that had happened, I had something that was worth fighting for. I had my family, my real family, my friends, and my future. And that was all I needed to start the next chapter. The journey had been long, and the road was still uncertain, but I was no longer afraid. I had faced the storm, and I had weathered it. Now, I was ready for whatever came next. And this time, I would face it on my own terms. The importance of standing up. As time passed, and the days grew longer in my new apartment, I found that the initial sense of relief I had felt after leaving the garage, and the painful chapter with Michael and Rachel began to evolve into something deeper, something more profound. It wasn't just the freedom from their cruelty or the legal victories that had brought me peace. It was the understanding of the power that comes from standing up for yourself, from asserting your worth, even when the world seems to be telling you that you don't matter. In the beginning, I had acted out of desperation. I had been pushed so far that I no longer saw a choice. The thought of living the rest of my life at the mercy of people who had been my family, who had once depended on me, was unbearable. But as the days wore on, I realized something. The fight for my dignity wasn't just about protecting my home or my finances. It was about something far more valuable. It was about reclaiming my sense of self, about finding the courage to demand the respect that had been so callously taken from me. I had spent my life building relationships, helping others, making sacrifices to ensure that my family had what they needed. I thought that's what love was: giving, sacrificing, and being there for people, no matter what. But love, I had learned, wasn't a one-way street. It wasn't just about giving. It was also about receiving. And somewhere along the way, I had forgotten that. I had been so focused on others that I had lost sight of my own needs, my own worth. The emotional toll of that loss was heavy, but it was a lesson that I had to learn the hard way. But now, I was finally learning to stand up for myself. It wasn't easy. It didn't come naturally. For so long, I had been the one who quietly endured, the one who absorbed the pain and kept going. It was in my nature. But now, I realized that enduring wasn't enough. Endurance without respect, without acknowledgement of your humanity, leads only to suffering. And I was tired of suffering. I reflected on the early days of my marriage to Charles. We had been partners in every sense of the word, supporting each other, building a life together, weathering the ups and downs. He had always made me feel like I mattered. I had been his equal, his companion. But after his death, something changed in me. I think I began to lose a part of myself in my grief. I had tried to fill the empty space with the demands of family, the needs of Michael, but somewhere along the way, I forgot about my own needs, my own desires. I became so wrapped up in taking care of everyone else that I lost sight of the person I used to be. It wasn't until the stroke that I realized how much I had neglected myself. The stroke had forced me to slow down, to stop, and that was when I began to see the cracks in my relationships. The way Michael and Rachel treated me, the way they saw me as a burden, a problem to be dealt with. These things had been building for years, but I hadn't noticed. I had been too focused on being the strong one, the reliable one, the one who could always handle everything. But when I became the one who needed help, I was suddenly invisible to them. That realization hit me hard. The woman I had been, the woman who fought for justice, who took care of her family, who gave everything to others, was fading into the background. I wasn't just losing my physical health. I was losing my sense of purpose, my identity. And that was the moment when I realized I couldn't let it happen. I couldn't let them take everything from me, not just my home, but my identity. I wasn't going to be erased. The fight for justice wasn't just about the legal battles I had fought or the court orders I had filed. It was about reclaiming my voice, my agency. It was about showing myself and the world that I still had value, that I still had something to offer. And more than anything, it was about proving to myself that I could stand up for what was mine, even when everything seemed stacked against me. As the legal case progressed, and I saw Michael and Rachel begin to unravel, I realized something else. Their cruelty wasn't just a reflection of their disregard for me. It was a reflection of their own weaknesses. They had thought they could manipulate me, take advantage of my vulnerability, but all they had done was expose their own insecurities, their own lack of character. They weren't strong. They were afraid. Afraid of losing control. Afraid of being exposed for who they really were. And that was where my strength lay. I had nothing left to lose. My dignity had been trampled, my trust betrayed. But in the process, I had found something even more powerful than the anger and the pain, the clarity to see things for what they were, and the courage to do something about it. I had spent so many years giving and sacrificing. But now, I was learning to give to myself. I was learning to say no when it mattered, to set boundaries, to demand respect. It wasn't about being selfish. It was about preserving my own worth. I had spent so much of my life worrying about others that I had forgotten to care for myself. But now, I was taking back that power. And it felt incredible. One afternoon, as I sat in my small apartment, the sunlight streaming through the window, I realized how far I had come. The pain of the past was still there, but it no longer defined me. The bitterness of betrayal had given way to a sense of peace. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I was strong. And that strength came from the simple truth that I had reclaimed my voice, my dignity, and my place in the world. Standing up for myself wasn't easy. It wasn't something that came naturally, and it wasn't something I had ever expected to have to do. But in the end, it was the most important thing I could have done. It was the one thing that allowed me to take back control of my life, to move forward without fear or regret. As I looked out the window, watching the world move on, I realized that life had a way of giving you the tools you needed when you least expected it. The stroke, the betrayal, the legal battle, all of it had forced me to confront my own strength. I had been knocked down, but I hadn't stayed there. I had gotten up, and I had fought. And now, I was ready for whatever came next. This was the beginning of something new, a new chapter, a new life, and it was mine to live on my terms. The ripple effect. The months that followed the court orders and the drama surrounding Michael and Rachel's deceit were quieter than I had expected. The whirlwind of emotions, the legal battles, the moments of fear and triumph, had all been a blur. Now, as I sat in my apartment, surrounded by the remnants of my old life, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed, not just in my circumstances, but in the way I viewed myself. It wasn't just the victory in the legal system that changed things. It was the internal transformation I had gone through. At one time, I would have looked at my life and the choices I made with a sense of regret, a feeling of having been victimized by the circumstances of others. But now, I saw things differently. The journey I had taken, the path I had been forced to walk, had given me strength. It had made me realize that my worth was not defined by what others thought of me, but by how I chose to see myself. Michael and Rachel, despite their attempts to strip me of everything I had worked for, had done something else. They had unintentionally awoken a part of me I had long forgotten. A part of me that had been buried under years of selflessness, years of giving, years of sacrificing my own needs for the sake of others. I had lost sight of who I was, of what I wanted, of my right to stand up for myself. But in fighting back, I had rediscovered that woman. And she was not weak. She was not invisible. She was strong, resilient, and determined. The emotional toll of everything that had happened had been immense. There had been moments where I thought I couldn't bear it, when the loneliness and the sense of betrayal felt like they were suffocating me. But I had made it through, and that realization, that I had survived and even thrived, was a victory in itself. The hardest part, of course, had been confronting the truth about Michael. For so many years I had seen him as the center of my world. He had been my pride, my joy, the person I had sacrificed everything for. To realize that he had so casually dismissed me, that he had plotted to take everything from me, was one of the most painful truths I had ever faced. But that pain, too, had its purpose. It had taught me that love, no matter how deep, is not enough if it isn't accompanied by respect. Respect for yourself, for the people you love, and for the boundaries you set. And in this case, Michael had failed. But that failure was his, not mine. I had spent so many years focused on him, on Rachel, on making sure they had everything they needed. But in the process, I had neglected myself. I had forgotten that my own needs mattered. And it wasn't just about physical needs. It was about emotional well-being, about standing up for my dignity and my self-worth. I had learned that I could love without losing myself in the process. I could give without giving up everything I had. But I had also learned that standing up for myself didn't have to mean fighting every battle. It didn't have to mean constant conflict or aggression. I had been quiet for too long, and I had allowed myself to be pushed into corners where I was treated as less than. Now I understood that true strength lay in knowing when to fight and when to walk away, when to stand firm and when to let go. Sometimes, letting go of the need for approval, of the need to be seen as the good person, was the strongest thing you could do. And I was learning to let go. Not of the memories, not of the people I had once loved, but of the bitterness that had once consumed me. Letting go wasn't easy. It meant accepting that Michael and Rachel might never understand, might never change. But I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need their validation. I had my own, and that was enough. I thought back to the months I had spent in that cold garage, alone and isolated. It had felt like I was being erased, like I didn't matter anymore. But now, in my quiet apartment, I realized that the garage had been a turning point. It had been the place where I had decided I wasn't going to be silenced anymore. It had been the moment when I took back my voice. The pain of those days still lingered, but it no longer defined me. In many ways, I had come full circle. I had spent so many years being the strong one, the dependable one, the one who gave everything without asking for anything in return. But now, I was learning to take care of myself. I was learning to be the person I had always wanted to be, the one who could stand tall, speak her truth, and protect her own well-being. I had the right to love myself, to care for myself, and to demand that others did the same. As I sat in my new living room, watching the sunlight shift across the floor, I felt a quiet sense of pride. This wasn't the life I had planned, but it was the life I had chosen. And it was mine. No one could take it from me anymore. I had fought for it, and in doing so, I had become someone I could be proud of. The years of giving and sacrificing had not been in vain. They had taught me valuable lessons about love, respect, and the importance of standing up for myself. And then there was the ripple effect. It wasn't just about me anymore. As I shared my story with others, friends, acquaintances, even strangers, I began to see how much my journey resonated with them. So many people had experienced similar betrayals, similar struggles, and in sharing my story, I had given them permission to share theirs. I wasn't the only one who had felt invisible, who had been taken for granted. And in that shared experience, we found strength. We found solidarity. Angela, my granddaughter, was one of the first people who reached out to me after everything had settled. She had watched me go through the worst moments of my life, and now she saw me standing stronger than ever before. She was proud of me, and that meant everything. "Grandma," she said one afternoon, as we sat together sipping tea, "I can't believe how much you've been through, but you're still here, still standing, and you're showing me what real strength looks like." Her words hit me hard. They were a reminder of why I had fought so hard. It wasn't just for myself. It was for the next generation, for people like Angela, who would carry the lessons forward. As I thought about everything I had learned, everything I had fought for, I realized that this wasn't just about standing up for myself. It was about empowering others to do the same. It was about showing them that they too had the strength to reclaim their lives, to demand respect, and to never settle for less than they deserved. I had fought for my dignity, for my peace, and now I was passing that strength on, one story at a time. And in the end, that ripple effect, the way it spread out to touch others, was the most beautiful part of this journey. The healing process. Time, as they say, has a way of healing. But in my case, healing wasn't just about waiting for the wounds to close. It was about actively choosing to rebuild, to reclaim, and to find peace once again. The healing process, I discovered, was a journey that didn't have a clear beginning or end. It wasn't linear. It was messy, difficult, and sometimes painful, but also full of grace, strength, and ultimately, clarity. The first few weeks in my new apartment were filled with a quiet sense of relief. The chaos of the past few months had been overwhelming, and the space I had now was the calm after the storm. It was a place where I could finally think, where I could finally breathe without the constant noise of Michael and Rachel's manipulation echoing in my mind. But even in this peaceful space, I was faced with an uncomfortable truth. Healing wasn't as simple as leaving the past behind. It required deep, personal work. It required facing the pain head-on and deciding to move forward, piece by piece. At first, I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder. The memories of those dark days spent in the garage, cold, isolated, and forgotten, still lingered, casting a long shadow over my thoughts. The hurt, the anger, the sense of betrayal were all raw emotions I hadn't fully processed. It felt as though the mere act of surviving those days had taken all the energy I had, leaving me emotionally drained. But I knew that if I didn't confront the emotional wreckage left behind, I would never truly be free. I needed to unpack those feelings, to acknowledge the grief, the loss, and the quiet rage I had been holding on to for so long. It wasn't easy. I found myself crying in the middle of the night, sometimes in the middle of the day, when the weight of everything hit me all at once. And yet, I also found comfort in those tears, because they meant I was finally letting go. I was no longer stuffing my emotions down, pretending they didn't exist. I was finally giving myself permission to feel. One of the first steps in my healing process was reconnecting with the things that had always brought me peace. Before all of this began, I had been someone who loved to read, who found solace in quiet afternoons with a good book, a cup of tea, and the sound of the world drifting by. Reading had always been a way for me to escape, to learn, and to reflect. But in the midst of my life's chaos, I had neglected it. Now, with the quiet of my apartment surrounding me, I dusted off my old bookshelves, pulled out my favorite novels, and allowed myself to get lost in their pages again. There was something therapeutic about reading, something that reminded me of the woman I used to be before everything had changed. The stories of perseverance, of overcoming odds, of finding strength in the face of adversity mirrored my own journey in so many ways. As I read, I began to realize that my story wasn't over. This chapter was difficult, yes, but it wasn't the final chapter. I had the power to write the ending I wanted. And then there were the moments when I would sit in silence. At first, silence had been something I feared. After all the noise, both literal and emotional, of the past few months, I had found the quiet almost unbearable. It had been a space I had associated with loneliness, with abandonment. But in my new apartment, silence became something different. It became a sanctuary. I began to savor the moments of stillness, the time when I could sit with my thoughts, reflect, and simply be. There was power in that silence. I started using it to reflect on what I had learned. I thought about the lessons I had learned from Michael and Rachel, painful as they were. I thought about how easy it had been for me to forget my own worth in my quest to please others, to take care of them. But now, I was learning to honor myself in the same way I had once honored them. I had allowed myself to become invisible, to be taken for granted. But I was determined not to make that mistake again. I realized that I had the right to stand up for myself, to ask for what I needed, and to refuse to be treated poorly. One of the most surprising parts of my healing process was the realization that I had more strength than I had ever known. I had spent so many years thinking that my worth was tied to my ability to care for others, to give of myself. But in doing so, I had lost myself. The stroke, the betrayal, the legal battle. They had all forced me to confront the reality that I couldn't keep giving without first giving to myself. The strength I needed was already inside me. It had always been there. I just had to find it again. And then, there was the emotional weight of forgiveness. I had often heard people talk about the power of forgiveness, about how it could release you from the chains of anger and resentment. But it wasn't until I sat with myself, really sat with my emotions, that I began to understand what forgiveness truly meant. It wasn't about excusing the behavior of others. It wasn't about saying that what Michael and Rachel had done to me was okay. It was about freeing myself from the emotional burden they had placed on me. It was about accepting that I couldn't control their actions, but I could control how I responded to them. Forgiveness, I realized, was not about them. It was about me. The decision to forgive didn't happen overnight, and it didn't come easily. But it was a decision I had to make if I was ever going to move forward. Holding on to that anger, that resentment, was like carrying a heavy weight with me everywhere I went. I had to let it go. It didn't mean I would forget what had happened, or that I would allow it to happen again. It simply meant that I was choosing to stop letting them take up space in my life, in my heart. As I let go of the anger and the hurt, I made room for something else. Peace. It wasn't the kind of peace that came from avoiding conflict or pretending everything was okay. It was the kind of peace that comes from knowing that you are enough, just as you are. It came from the acceptance that while life may not always go the way you expect, you still have the power to shape your own story. I thought back to the moments in the garage when I felt invisible, abandoned, forgotten. It had felt like the end of everything, the end of my relationship with Michael, the end of the life I thought I had. But now, sitting in my apartment, I knew it was only the beginning. It was the beginning of my own healing, my own transformation. The healing process, I realized, wasn't just about moving on. It was about becoming who I was always meant to be, a woman who had the strength to fight for herself, the wisdom to let go of what no longer served her, and the courage to live her truth. And in that, I found my peace. Life has a way of testing our strength, especially as we age, but it's important to remember that we are never truly powerless. The key lesson I've learned through hardship is that our worth is not defined by the actions or opinions of others, but by how we choose to see ourselves. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking we must always give, always sacrifice. But it's equally important to honor our own needs and boundaries. It's okay to stand up for ourselves, to say no when necessary, and to reclaim our dignity when others have taken it for granted. Healing, whether physical or emotional, is not about forgetting or letting go of what has hurt us, but about finding peace within ourselves. As we age, it becomes even more crucial to recognize our inner strength and embrace our own worth, because we've earned it through a lifetime of love, resilience, and hard work. Remember, no matter what life throws at us, we always have the ability to rewrite our own story and find new purpose in every chapter. Thank you for being part of this powerful story. If it resonated with you, we'd love for you to share your thoughts. Don't forget to check out the next video where we continue to explore the lessons and triumphs that shape our lives. Until next time, remember, it's never too late to find your voice.